with the journal, how you can work with the editor and the referees, how you can work with each other to improve the chances of getting your paper published. It's very challenging for the first time. It's a big challenge for you if you're trying to get your paper published for the first time. A lot of new things to learn. It's very intimidating. You have a lot of pressure on you and you're quite frightened of the system. So I will take you through some steps this afternoon that hopefully will make the whole task a lot easier for you. Selecting the right journal for your paper is very important. The journal should be one that typically carries the subject matter of your paper. So if you've written a post-harvest paper, try and find a post-harvest journal to publish it in. Don't publish it in a tree fruit journal unless they carry post-harvest papers. I know that sounds obvious, but I reject a lot of papers that are sent to me because they don't fit the journal. People that have worked on wheat and corn send their papers to me and I publish a fruit journal. So I just send it back saying not suitable. So pick a journal that matches the subject matter, the content of your paper. And also select a journal that you think will be appropriate to the audience for your research, your results, and the conclusions that you draw. So if it's on a Thai fruit that is primarily addressing a challenge that Thai farmers have, then you would probably pick a Thai journal to publish in. But if it is just as relevant to Vietnamese growers and to Indian growers, then you might pick a journal that publishes a lot of subtropical fruit papers. So try and think about your audience and the journals that they would read in relation to your subject matter. If you get the journal right, then things will go a lot faster. You will get to publication a lot quicker. Your professional image will be greater because you'll be in a community of people that you would normally work with on that subject. And it gives you the biggest audience because they're the ones that will be reading that journal for their use. And they'll be the ones that will be in the biggest numbers. Probably the easiest thing to do when you're looking at what journal to publish in is have a look at your reference list. And it's very likely that in that reference list there will be one journal that you cite more than any other. Post-harvest people, that might be the Journal of Post-Harvest Biology and Biotechnology. The fruit people, it might be the Journal of the American Society for Horticultural Science. It might be the Journal of Horticultural Science and Biotechnology. You will know when you look at your reference list where you are citing most of the papers from. That journal is likely to be a good one for you to target for your work. So think about looking at your reference list to give you some guidance in that respect. Once you've identified that journal, on the website, look up the journal and look at the section called Instructions to Authors or Guidelines to Authors, and make sure you understand all of the instructions that they lay out and make sure that you can meet those requirements from that journal. That will take you some time. Those instructions can often go on for 3 or 4 or 5 pages. So there's a lot to read and a lot to understand. Also have a look at a recent issue of the journal, of that journal. It will probably have a shortened version of guidelines to authors, and then you can refer to some of the manuscripts in that journal to look at the style things that we talked about during the other presentations. Take your time. That can be a very challenging process, just understanding those instructions. They are very detailed, they're very specific, and they take some time to understand. So look at the journal website. You might want to consider the journal's impact factor. I'm not sure how important that is in this university. My advice to you would be, don't bother about that. Pick the best journal. If it's got a good impact factor, fine. If it hasn't, don't go chasing the impact factor. Chase the best journal for your paper. We can have a discussion about impact factors later if you like, but they're tending to go out of fashion. But let me give you an example of the related issue of citation index. In my life, I've worked on corn and I've worked on kiwi fruit. With corn, my guess is that there's probably 500 scientists in the world that work on corn. I can tell you there's about 5 that work on kiwi fruit. Now, I'm the same scientist. I have this one brain. My citation index for corn is way up here. My citation index for kiwi fruit is way down here. It doesn't make sense. I'm the same person. Of course, with only about 5 people working on kiwi fruit, not many people are going to cite my work. Whereas a lot of people work on corn, and if the project is any good, a lot of people will cite it. So don't get too misled with impact factor. It can be misused, and it's not a very helpful tool. One of the things that people generally underestimate are page charges. A lot of journals will charge you to publish per page, not per article, per page. And we can be talking in American dollars, $10, $12, $15,000. So if your lab budget, if your university's budget, your research station budget cannot pay those charges, you'll have to go to another journal. The page charges will be specified on the website, and you can look that up so there's no surprises. Sometimes, very rarely, you can try and get the page charges put aside, waived. But you can't guarantee that they will charge you nothing. You can try that, but be ready to pay the page charges would be my advice, and find a journal where that's affordable. So there's quite a number of things for you to consider when you're trying to pick the right journal. So you pick the journal, you've decided, yes, I'll go to that one, and you're ready to submit. Well, that can be pretty exciting. You hit the send button on the computer and you feel really good that you've sent off your paper, and then you think, oh, what's going to happen next? So we'll talk about some of the things that can happen next. But you're going to be judged by independent people. You don't know who they are, they know who you are, and they're generally experts in your field of study. That can be very stressful just thinking about that. So meet the guidelines set down by the journal. If you don't do that, they're likely to send your manuscript back to you. You need to interact professionally through this whole process. With the editor in particular, who you're dealing with directly and indirectly to the referees that are going to assess your manuscript. Typically, 2 or 3 referees will assess your manuscript. Always 2, sometimes 3. Your goal is to work with those people to make sure your manuscript gets published as easily as possible and as quickly as possible. So you need to regard the referees and the editor as being helpful, even, as I've said up here, even if you want to kill them. And we'll see some reports later where I'm sure the author would have liked to kill the referees, but if they read the reports, they'll see that they were being helpful. Now, this is as much for the staff in the room as it is for the students. But my advice to you is to work together if you can. A lot of you are in labs where there's 3 or 4 students working together. Get into the habit of sharing with one another and offering to read drafts of manuscripts. It's what I call a fresh pair of eyes. If you're sitting looking at your work all day, you get tired of it. You don't see spelling mistakes. Even if the computer has got a red line under a word, you tend to ignore that and move on. Whereas a colleague in the lab, having a look at it, will say to you, do you really mean that word? I think you mean this word. Or have you realized that that paragraph is just one sentence and it's 11 lines long? And so on. Or have you thought about reordering your table this way? Now you do it for them this time, they do it for you next time. And the key thing is that the more you do, the more involved you become of being critical of scientific writing and learning from that. So you learn from each other. So if you're not doing that in your lab, think about doing it. You don't need the head of the department to tell you. Just agree amongst yourselves that you will do that. Obviously, the better you can plan your research before you do anything, the better, and if you can practice your writing and read other people's writing, then you will develop high quality standards more quickly. Carefully select the most appropriate journal. And then the other thing that in my young career I found very helpful is I was in a group of about 60 people. About half were scientists and about half were technicians. And amongst the 30 scientists, we would set up 4 review panels of 3 people for every manuscript coming out of the unit. And those people would act like editors and referees and go through the manuscript before it went to the journal and make comments back to the writer or to the editor, to the writers and the authors and the co-authors. So if you're not doing that within KMUTT, you might think about doing it at a departmental level. That every manuscript that you are writing in the department goes to a panel. It can be a fixed panel for 12 months. It might rotate, it might change with each manuscript. It's up to you. But again, you're sharing that experience and you're learning from one another. And you're picking up the mistakes before they go to the journal. So the whole process becomes a lot more efficient. So if you're not already doing that, and you may be, that's good, keep doing it. If you're not, perhaps think about setting up an in-house peer review system. And then when you get the editors and the referees' comments back, take them seriously, look at them carefully, and use those comments to improve your manuscript. So who is this editor? Well, the editor is normally employed part-time or full-time by a publishing company or by an organisation. So they're in a paid position. I'm the editor of an American journal. They don't pay me very much, but I do get some money for doing the job. The job of the editor is to maintain the reputation and competitiveness of the journal. So they're the ones that set and maintain the standards. That one person. So a lot comes back to the responsibility of that editor. The referees are chosen by the editor to assist the editor in meeting that goal of maintaining the standards of the journal. So when they referee your paper, yes, they're looking at your paper, but behind that they're thinking about the standards of the journal and whether you meet those or not. The editor will read your manuscript. Every manuscript that comes to me, I read it. Every one. They make sure it meets the scope of the journal. Sometimes I only have to read the title. That's enough to tell me it doesn't fit the journal, so I send it back. They look at the English language. They look at the structure of the text, things we talked about this morning and yesterday. And they look at the overall standing of the research. Is it of a high standard? Is it original? Is it just copying what somebody else did? And if they're happy that it meets all of those things, they say, yep. So we'll send it to the referees. They say no, goes back to you and says, sorry, your manuscript's not suitable for the journal, we suggest you submit somewhere else. End of the transaction. No discussion allowed thereon, that decision has been made. So the editor has sent your manuscript into 2 or 3 referees. The editor gets the reports back and might prepare a summary report where the referees have common criticisms, common comments, and he or she will make a recommendation back to you as the author as to whether they will accept the paper or reject it. Now sometimes, pretty well every time, if the manuscript is accepted, they'll still want you to address the comments that the referees have made. See some examples of that shortly. So what are the referees doing in all of this? Well, a number of things. First of all, they're wanting to make sure that the hypothesis or the aim or the objective that you set out is being appropriately tested and that the results are appropriately interpreted, that the results are consistent with the methods that we used. So they're looking at all of the research-related elements in your manuscript. They want to make sure that the claims that you make are supported by the data. And where you make some conclusions and make some recommendations, that those recommendations are supported by the data. So if you've got a graph with data points pretty scattered and an R-squared of 0.6 and you say there was a very strong correlation between this factor and that factor, they're going to say, no, need an R-squared of at least 0.9 to make that sort of a claim. We recommend that the authors are more guarded, more reserved in the conclusions that they present. Comments like that will start coming through. So they want to make sure that the claims that you're making are supported by the data. Is the work new? Is it novel? Is it important? And is it of a good standard for the journal? Is the style and presentation consistent with the journal style and presentation? So if the paragraphs have to be indented, have you indented them? If the instructions say tables should not have lined columns and you've got them in, you'll get an instruction to take them out. So even the simplest of style issues, the referees will comment on if you haven't got them right. And then they write a report advising the authors where you might be able to improve things. Might have a lot of questions, but they'll also make some comments about where approvals could be made. Alright, so before all that happens, you've got to submit your paper, and if you have a look at handout number 14, you'll see a mock-up of a letter that you might send with your manuscript when you send it into the journal. And I pretended in this case that one of you is writing to me as the editor of the journal that I'm the editor of. But just have a look through that letter. First of all, there's a statement where you give the title of the paper and the author names, preferably, and what the research is about. Why might you do that? Well, you might have got confused in your office. You might have been handling about 3 manuscripts at once, and it is possible that you could send the wrong manuscript to the journal. So the letter makes it very clear which manuscript that editor is supposed to be receiving. You make a statement that the research is original, it's not copying anybody else, and that the manuscript hasn't been submitted to another journal. When you submit a journal, you're only allowed, convention says you're only allowed to send it to one journal at a time. If that journal rejects you, then you can go to another journal, but don't send it out to 2 or 3 journals. That's not the convention that's used. You highlight in the letter, very briefly, why you think the research is novel and new, and what its significance is. You might, if there's something unusual, like you want a photograph included, you might indicate that the photograph is very special and it should be included, and you acknowledge that that will have some special page charges associated with it, particularly if you want colour. And at the bottom you express the hope that everything's good and you look forward to the reply from the editor. So don't just send the editor an email saying, please see attached, full stop, and attach your manuscript. Put the manuscript in there and send us an attached letter like the one I've given you that goes with your manuscript. You're being quite formal, you're being very polite, you're being very structured in what you're doing. It improves your chance of success. So that's not a bad letter to use as a template for submitting your manuscript. Now, referees. Are referees paid? Who thinks referees are paid? Who thinks they're not paid? Who doesn't know? Referees are specialists in their field and they are not paid. Referees are not paid. So if I get a paper to referee, if Tongfeng gets a paper to referee, we do it at home, we do it in the weekends, we do it when we could be having a beer. Maybe we do it while we're having a beer, but we do it as volunteers. So if you think about that, referees are doing what they are doing out of goodwill. They are anonymous, you won't know who they are. You won't know who they are. Nor can you contact them directly. You can only contact them through the editor. They bring a fresh, critical perspective to the content of your paper and the style of writing that you've used. They haven't seen it before, they may know you, chances are they won't know you, and they have that fresh pair of eyes that I talked about. They will test in their heads, from their experience, your ideas, theories, methods, results, interpretations and conclusions. They will critique your manuscript in every regard. from the title to the last full stop. And a typical paper, even if it's a good one, will take about 4 hours to review, perhaps longer. So it's quite a big commitment. And they are intending to be helpful. They are intending to be helpful. So just remember that. What they, and this is on your, obviously in your PowerPoint printout, it may not be easy to see, but this is an example from one journal of what the referees are expected to do. Is the contribution new? Yes or no? Is it suitable for publication in this journal? Yes or no? Are all the figures and tables necessary? Yes or no? Are the references in the literature cited section up to date, complete, and the journal titles correctly abbreviated? Yes or no? So they will go through quite a long checklist where specific yes or no answers are required. And clearly, if there's a lot of ticks in the no box, you're in trouble, because you haven't followed the journal style, you haven't written clearly, and you haven't clearly thought about a lot of the content of your paper. That will be picked up very, very quickly. Then there is a rating. Is the paper excellent, good, or poor? Then another piece. Please use a separate sheet for your comments. We'll have a look at some of those in a moment. So aside from the checklist, they then write a report on your paper. And then at the end, is it accepted or is it rejected? And they send that, they sign it, send it back to the editor, along with their report. And if you get 2 or 3 referees where they've all said no, they've all said reject, then you better go looking elsewhere. We'll talk about that in a second. So if you like to have a look at handout number 15, just quietly read through that for a couple of minutes. These are real examples.